Sounds good. Good morning, everybody. It's great to see you, and I think we can still say Happy New Year. And we're so delighted, Reverend Kris, to welcome you to the forum at St. Luke's. And Naomi's going to say a little more about how this has come to be, but we're so honored by your presence and very much looking forward to our conversation today.
Thank you so much, Pastor.
So, like Ryan said, we are so excited to welcome Reverend Kris, who is a nationally certified trainer in the Sacred Conversations to End Racism curriculum of the United Church of Christ. And you train lay people and clergy. And the reason that we welcome you here today with your wealth of knowledge is that Susan and I were taking this class with other clergy and lay people in Darien, and that's how we came to know Kris and are so excited to welcome her. So Kris is a graduate of Vassar and the Fordham University School of Law, where she got her BA and Doctor of Jurisprudence degrees. She served as an assistant district attorney in the New York County District Attorney's Office for several years before entering private practice of law. And she is also a rector, associate minister, at Safe Haven UCC in Ridgewood, New York. And then in addition to all of this amazing work, she is also an advisor or executive at several nonprofit organizations, including Truth and Conciliation and Jasser Jor, Emerging Philanthropist. Jazz, thank you.
Okay.
So welcome. We're so happy to have you here with us.
I am so grateful to be here with all of you. My roots are in the Episcopal Church. I went to a small Episcopalian school called St. Hilda's in St. Hugh's in New York, and then I graduated. From kindergarten through high school, and our graduation was at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. And this particular order of nuns from the Episcopalian Church started this church this school was started by a black, she was a Black Canadian nun, and started the school. And so it was just, I'm really, really grateful to be with you all. So good to see you, Naomi, as usual. And I see that Susan is here, although I can't see her face. I see that Susan is here. And it's just really a pleasure to be with all of you in this very challenging season that we're in. We're really in a state, but it's good when the people of God can gather together to pray and to learn together and to discuss openly the issues that we're facing in our country. So may I offer a prayer to begin? Father, Mother, everything, God, we are so grateful just to be together during this time in this season on this day. Thank you for waking us up this morning. Thank you for giving us the activity of our limbs and giving us the activity of our minds so that we can figure out together how to better live, love, and serve in these challenging times. Now, oh God, I ask that you fill me up with your Holy Spirit, diminish me so that you may increase, give us together everything we need for such a time as this to live, love, and serve as you have commanded and commissioned us to do. We lift this prayer by your power and in the precious name of your Son, Jesus the Christ, and we say amen.
Amen.
Amen. So I wanted to start this time together with a video. I mean, Naomi and Susan will tell you that during the training, we used a lot of video presentations, and this is about 17 minutes, but it's really chock full. And then I'm just going to say a few words about it, or maybe we'll discuss it first and then I'll say a few words. But I really, this is interactive. It's not, I don't want to just talk at you. I want us to talk together, because that's the only way I believe in community that we are going to be able to know each other, to learn each other, and to figure out together how we can move forward as the body of Christ. So give me a moment. I'm going to share my screen, and then I'll talk to you on the other side of this.
Yat A. Mark Charles Inishya. Sin Bake Danan Nishla, to Toy Haglini Bashas Chin. Sin Bake Danan Basha Che, to the Cheatney Bashanella. In the Navajo culture, when you introduce yourself, you always name your 4 clans. We're a matrilineal people, and our identities come from our mother's mother. Now, my mother's mother happens to be American of Dutch heritage, and so I say Sin Bake Danan Nishla, which translated means I'm from the wooden shoe people. My second clan, my father's mother, is Toihaglini, which is the waters that flow together. My third clan, my mother's father, is also Tsinbake Dene. And my fourth clan, my father's father, is Totachitni, and that's the Bitterwater clan. It's one of the original clans of our Navajo people. Before I go any further, I want to first acknowledge that we are on the land of the Pamunkey, the Haudenosaunee, and the Piscataway. These are the tribes that lived here. They raised their families here, they hunted here, they fished here, they farmed here, they buried their ancestors here. These were the people who had society and life here long before Columbus got lost at sea. These were the tribes that were ethnically cleansed and removed from these lands so that the state of Virginia, the District of Columbia, and the state of Maryland could be founded. And I like to acknowledge the people whose land I'm standing on wherever I go around the country. First, just to honor them and to thank them for the years they've stewarded these lands. And second, to remind myself, to remind us to be more humble as we walk on these lands, acknowledging that there is a story that goes beyond the history that we've read and that we're taught in our schools. In his final State of the Union, President Obama was talking about the need in our nation for a new politics. And he said, we the people. Our Constitution begins with these 3 simple words we've come to recognize mean all the people. Now, when I heard that, as a Native man, I had to stop and ask when. I've read our founding documents, I've studied our history, I see the current political environment, and I had to question, when did we decide as a nation that we the people actually means all the people? Let me demonstrate. Invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever. Reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, convert them to his and to their use and profit. These are the words of Pope Nicholas V in a papal bull written in 1452. Now, this papal bull, along with other papal bulls written between 1452 and 1493, collectively are known as what we call the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is essentially the church in Europe saying to the nations of Europe, wherever you go, whatever lands you find not ruled by white European Christian rulers, those people are subhuman and their lands are yours for the taking. This is literally the doctrine that let European nations go into Africa, colonize the continent, and enslave the people. They didn't believe them to be human. This is the same doctrine that let Columbus, who was lost at sea, land in this new world, which was already inhabited by millions, and claimed to have discovered it. If you think about it, you cannot discover lands already inhabited. If you don't believe me, leave your cell phones, your smartphones, your car keys, your laptops out. I'll come by and discover them for you. Clearly, this is not discovery, right? This is stealing, this is conquering, this is colonizing. The fact that to this day we have a national holiday honoring Christopher Columbus as the discoverer of America reveals the implicit racial bias of the nation, which is that indigenous peoples, people of color, are not fully human. So this makes the doctrine of discovery a systemically white supremacist doctrine that assumes the dehumanization of indigenous peoples. Now, the challenge is what our founding fathers have done with this doctrine throughout our nation's history. So in 1763, King George drew a line down the Appalachian Mountains, and he said to the colonies that were here that they no longer had the right of discovery of the empty Indian lands west of Appalachia. This upset the colonies. They wanted access to those lands. So a few years later, they wrote a letter of protest. In their letter, they accused the king of raising the conditions of new appropriations of land. They went on in their letter to state that he has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages. They signed their letter on July 4th, 1776. Literally 30 lines below the statement, all men are created equal, the Declaration of Independence refers to natives as merciless Indian savages, making it very clear the only reason our founding fathers used this inclusive term, all men, because they had a very narrow definition of who was actually human. This, of course, makes our Declaration of Independence a systemically white supremacist document that assumes the dehumanization of indigenous peoples. Now, a few years later, our founding fathers wrote another document. They started this one with the words, "We the people of the United States." This, of course, is the preamble to the Constitution. However, if you read just a few lines later, down to Article 1, Section 2, Article 1, Section 2 is the section of the Constitution that defines who is and who is not covered by this Constitution, who is and who is not a part of this union. If you read Article 1, Section 2, the first thing you will note is it never mentions women. This is important because if you read the entire Constitution from preamble through the 27th Amendment, you will find that there are 51 gender-specific male pronouns in regards to who can run for office, who can hold office, even who is protected by this document. 51 he, him, and his, and not a single female pronoun. So we first have to note, Article 1, Section 2 never mentions women. Second, it specifically excludes natives. And third, it counts Africans as 3/5 of a person. So who's left? Well, white landowning men is who could vote. Now, we have to ponder this for a moment. The reason our Constitution was written, the purpose of our Constitution, is to protect the interests of white landowning men. So today, we act shocked that women earn 70 cents to the dollar. This shouldn't shock us. Our Constitution is working. We act surprised that our prisons are filled with people of color. This shouldn't surprise us. Our Constitution is working. We act outraged that in 2010, the Supreme Court sided with Citizens United and rules that corporations now have the same rights to political free speech as individuals. This is what opens the door for super PACs, unlimited contributions to candidates. This shouldn't surprise us. The Constitution's doing exactly what it was designed to do, is protecting the interests of white landowning men. So this makes our Constitution a systemically white supremacist and sexist document that assumes the white landowning male has the authority to decide who is and who is not human. Now, about 50 years later, we had a Supreme Court case. This is Johnson versus McIntosh. It's two men of European descent. They're litigating over a single piece of land. One of them got the land from a native tribe. The other one got the same piece of land from the government, and they wanted to know who owned it, who had the right to sell the land. The case goes all the way to the Supreme Court. This is the Marshall Court, and they had to decide the principle upon which land titles were based. So they ruled that the principle was that discovery gave title to the land. And then they go on to reference the doctrine of discovery and rule that natives who were here first but are less than human, we only have what's called the right of occupancy to the land, like a fish would occupy water or a bird would occupy the air. And Europeans have the right of discovery to the land, the fee title to the land, and therefore they are the true title holders. This, of course, creates the legal precedent for land titles. This and a few other cases between the 1820s and 1830s. And this precedent and the doctrine of discovery are referenced by the Supreme Court in 1954, in 1985, and most recently in 2005. Now I want to talk about this 2005 case for a moment. So in 1998, the Oneida Indian Nation purchased some of their traditional lands on the open market. They paid full price for them in the state of New York, which is where they traditionally resided, and they wanted to exercise their traditional sovereignty over these lands, which would mean they were not taxable. Now, the city of Sherrill, which is where the land resided, they wanted the tax revenue from these lands, and so they sued the Oneida Indian Nation in federal district court. The Oneida Indian Nation won that case, and the city of Sherrill appealed to the Federal Court of Appeals. The decision was upheld, and so they appealed to the Supreme Court. The case was heard in 2005, and in arguing this case, the court actually reversed the rulings of the lower courts. And in the first footnote of the case, when they're setting precedent, they reference the doctrine of discovery. They then go on to argue that given the Oneida's long delay in seeking judicial relief, we hold that the tribe cannot unilaterally revive its ancient sovereignty. They then go on to argue that it is impossible to rescind the cession and restore the Indians to their former rights because the lands have been open to settlement, which is white settlement, and large portions of them are now in the possession of innumerable innocent purchasers. Now, in the original 1823 Supreme Court cases, John Marshall is building his case. He actually refers to natives as savages. And he says, but the tribes of Indians inhabiting this country were fierce savages, whose occupation was war, and whose subsistence was drawn chiefly from the forests. To leave them in possession of their country was to leave the country a wilderness. Now, in 2005, the court makes almost the same argument. It says, moreover, the properties here involved have greatly increased in value since the Oneidas sold them 200 years ago. Notably, it was not until lately that the Oneidas sought to regain ancient sovereignty over land converted from wilderness to become parts of city like Sherrill. This is the same argument John Marshall was making. It's just not using the word savages. So the Supreme Court then concludes that we now reject the unification theory of the Oneida Indian Nation and the United States, and hold that the standards of federal Indian law, which again, in footnote 1, is based on the doctrine of discovery, and the federal equity practice preclude the tribe from rekindling the embers of sovereignty that long ago grew cold. This is quite possibly the most white supremacist Supreme Court decision written in my lifetime. And it was written and delivered by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. You see, white supremacy is a bipartisan value, and we don't know what to do with that. In 2016, Donald Trump won the US presidency by campaigning with a promise to make America great again. Not to be outdone, Hillary Clinton responded and told her supporters that America's great already. In October 2016, in the third presidential debate, she expanded and said, America is great because America is good. And Donald Trump concurred. He said, I agree with her. I agree with everything she just said. See, they both had a broad base of agreement. They both agreed our past, our history, which included the enslavement of African people and the genocide of Native peoples, and our foundations, which are based on the doctrine of discovery and the lie of white supremacy. They both agreed those things were great. They disagreed if we were great in 2016. Donald said no and Hillary said yes. See, we were duped. Many of us thought that the 2016 election was about racism versus anti-racism, equality versus inequality. What we were actually deciding on as a nation was, did we want Donald Trump to make America explicitly white supremacist, racist, and sexist again? Or did we want Hillary Clinton to work on our behalf to keep our white supremacy and racism implicit? And we didn't know what to do with that. It's easier to call out that candidate, to demonize that Supreme Court nominee, to oppose that particular politician, than it is to deal with our foundations. Why? Because our foundations are what prop up our land titles. See, we would rather believe that the United States of America is racist and sexist and white supremacist in spite of our foundations. But the truth is we are white supremacist, racist, and sexist as a nation because of our foundations, and we don't know what to do with that. African Americans and women will never be included as equal until we deal with the racism and sexism embedded in our foundations. Native Americans, my people, will never be included in We the People until as a nation we deal with the doctrine of discovery and our dehumanizing legal precedent for land titles. There's an Aboriginal leader named George Erasmus, and he says where common memory is lacking, where people do not share in the same past, there can be no real community. If you want to build community, he says, you have to start by creating a common memory. I think this quote is brilliant, and it gets to the heart of our nation's problem with race, which is we don't have a common memory. We have a white majority that remembers a history, a mythological history of discovery, expansion, exceptionalism, and opportunities. And we have communities of color that have the lived experience of stolen lands, broken treaties, slavery, Jim Crow laws, boarding schools, ethnic cleansing, genocide, Indian removal, internment camps, segregation, mass incarceration, and families separated at our borders. We have no common memory, and I think we all can agree that community on a national level is absolutely in the pits. I'm proposing that the United States of America needs a national dialogue on race, gender, and class. A conversation on par with the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions that took place in South Africa, in Rwanda, and in Canada. I would call ours Truth and Conciliation, because reconciliation implies there was a previous harmony. And I think we need it sooner rather than later. My goal is 2021. Tonight, we are talking about legacy. The Iroquois did not just look 7 generations into the future. They looked 7 generations into their past. They understood that they were a part of a vast transgenerational community. And this is my challenge to you tonight. If we can learn from the wisdom of our indigenous hosts who have been stewarding these lands for hundreds, even thousands of years, if we can acknowledge the vile racism, sexism, colonialism, and white supremacy that our founding fathers embedded deep into our foundations, and if we can pivot, we might just be able to leave a different legacy for our children's, grandchildren's, grandchildren's, grandchildren. A legacy that for the first time, we the people might actually mean all the people. Thank you very much.
Okay. That sets the stage, I think. I switched us to gallery view because I really want to see everybody's faces, whoever is willing to be seen. So maybe we should start with just sort of your reactions, your thoughts about what you just watched. Don't all speak at once. I'm not, Naomi and Susan will tell you that I will call on you. So even though I don't know you. So why don't we start with Ryan? Ryan, tell me what are your thoughts about that?
Sure, Kris. I have complicated thoughts, so I'm unpacking them in real time. You know, I studied history, and so particularly American history and history of race in the South. That was sort of my undergraduate focus, and so I couldn't agree more that any future has to be built on a real shared understanding of our past.
Right.
I think that is so important. I guess I had a few reactions in the video where I felt like our speaker was maybe underrepresenting how much understanding there might already be or progress, which is not to say that there's not incredible work to do. But I wondered about some of the statements that might turn off people from being able to engage in the conversation. You know, I think to say that something like the Constitution was a white supremacist document is different than is a white supremacist document. It feels like, frankly, a kind of Antonin Scalia originalist reading of a text, that it can only mean what it meant at the beginning. And I'm not sure that's true. I think there's a long history of interpretation that has pushed it, which is not to say that it doesn't need to be pushed further. So I guess that's my reaction is couldn't agree more that the future has to be built on a shared understanding of the past, and that has to be looked at with courage.
Yes, thank you. You know, it's interesting that for all the times that the Constitution has been amended, never was the language about Indian savages and African descendant people removed from the Constitution by amendment. So that tells me something.
Yep,
It
that's a
tells
fair
me
point.
something important, you know.
That's a
Yeah.
very good point.
So I mean, so in fact, it is not was, but is a white supremacist document and a foundationally racist document that's never been, you know, corrected. So, I mean, that's just my opinion. So all of these opinions are my own, and I respect everybody else's as well. Anybody else?
Well, is that the first step? What's the first step? My problem is that we hear all this stuff all the time, and I agree with it as well. But what do we do?
Right. And, you know, I think that, Craig, thank you so much for saying that, because that's the question that we get routinely in the work that we do around the country in sacred conversations. And, you know, my training partner, Claire, likes to say, you know, it's, yes, we hear it all the time, but do we really understand it? We are a people that are very quick to push past and move past the problem, looking at the real foundation and looking at the real issues, and quickly wanting to go to solutions because it's so uncomfortable to hear the history. It's very uncomfortable to sit in Saturday. You know, we're an Easter people. We much prefer, you know, it's like, okay, we had Friday, we had Good Friday, and now, and you know, but we don't want to sit in Saturday. You know, let's hurry up and get to the resurrection part. Let's get to that. But I think that in order for us to begin to heal, in order for us to begin to have these very uncomfortable, you know, we call these sacred conversations safe spaces, but safe does not imply comfort. And so I see you, William, part of the challenge is to really sit in the knowledge, you know, to sit in the knowledge of what we are as a country, where we are as a country, to understand the mechanisms and the inner workings of white supremacist ideology, how it has infected and invaded all of our systems, every single system, and how it really is foundational. So, and then what we do is, I believe, this is my opinion, and there are civil rights activists and various thoughts about this, but I think that my opinion is that we cannot get beyond where we are as a nation, where we are as people, until we really start to build intentional community. And you know, you can't build like I think that has to be done in small groups. My work, for me, where I am, is to build relationship in small groups so that we can all see one another's humanity. That's the tremendous value that I get from engaging in sacred conversations, because I'm building relationships with people all over the country that I'm only meeting this way by Zoom, right, during this pandemic. But really coming to love and feel and understand one another and see one another's common humanity. And I think that until we do that, we're not going to have any incentive to try to collectively figure out how we advocate to change systems, how we advocate to create the beloved community of God. That's my opinion. William, you're muted. You're muted.
Perhaps that's just as well.
No, I don't think so.
You know, it's amazing how much this period of COVID has led so many of us down the road of some of this discovery and introspection. It's interesting that Mark went all the way back to, I think, 1452 was when the papal bull was issued that he referred to. I mean, basically what that says is, if we're building community and building the history, then the church is responsible for this all.
Yes.
Which in and of itself is obviously, you know, if you carry that out, that's pretty upsetting in and of itself. And then those of us who, and perhaps in our age group, there were many of us who learned and were able to recite the Constitution word by word, and we, you know, or certainly the the Bill of Rights, etc. You know, you skipped right over some of those words. The 3/5. You know, you didn't even think about it, and particularly if you lived in a small Midwestern town where there really wasn't any other type of diversity. So a lot of that, you know, it is inbred in just because it's always been there. So I guess my point is, when you start talking about community by the same way that Mark was talking, it's truly interesting, because I don't think that the application that he was talking about for the Oneida in the Snelling case or the Schelling case is applied everywhere in the United States. I think some tribes are able to annex land into their reservation and lands. And I think even here in Connecticut, where they have, or in other states where they have casinos, they've been able to get certain, I don't know, I'm not a legal, but I think that for some reason, I mean, the wording of that decision was shocking. But it's sort of surprising, because I think there's a lot of other precedent. But I'm not going, that wasn't what I was trying to say. I was just thinking along your line of community and conversation. It has to happen. There's no question. It has to happen. But where one starts, it's the conversations are always going to be confrontational.
Well, you know, I want to push back on that, because I don't think that the conversations have to be confrontational. I think that the conversations have to be honest. And honest does not mean, to me, confrontational. I think that what happens is that we do have to, well, confrontational in that we do have to confront the reality, the truth. We have to be able to look at it in the face, look at it bold-faced, you know, in a way that is going to allow all of us to have a common history, to understand what the history is. And the 2005 decision has not been reversed. That's still the law of the land. It's Supreme Court, so it's not going to, you know, that's the law that you have to uphold. It's the law of the land. But the bottom line is that I think your point about the papal bull, right, really does speak to why it is critical for the church not to shy away from this conversation. It's very uncomfortable, I will grant you that, especially for people of European descent, because there's this assumption that, you know, we're entering into the conversation to finger point, to blame, to shame, and to make people feel guilty. And that's not the case, because that's not useful. I mean, it's only, shame and guilt are only useful to the point that it inspires transformation. And after that, it's completely useless. I mean, it just does not, it doesn't help anything. That's not the point. The point is to look at our common history, to look at the history of the involvement of the church. It's not just the involvement of the church. The church started this. The church started this concept, calling anybody, you know, if you go anywhere you go in the world and you find people that are not Christian, that are unlike you, wherever they are, they're savages, they're pagans, they're animals, they're not humans, you can do whatever you want. That's the church's legacy. And it's not, you know, it's current. I mean, when you look at where the church is today in terms of our deep division, when you talk about white evangelical churches that have perpetuated a doctrine that Trump is the second coming of Jesus, essentially, is what the sort of the implication. And I'm not trying to get political, but what I'm trying to say is there has been, well, I'll just say this, that I believe that the church is responsible for engaging in this conversation in a very profound and deep way to try to start to reverse the notion that people that are not European descendant are less than human, are less than human. That is something that still exists in this country. I mean, you can see it. It's not, you know, we the people never meant all the people. It meant only male Euro descendant people. And the papal bulls make it clear that anyone found in nations that they were subhuman and not included in the people of we the people. Genocide, kidnapping. Go ahead, Donald.
Yeah, much as I find that the introduction we've had here useful, the history and whatnot, and I must admit, I discovered that history, the relationship between landowning and economics, when I started studying graduate studies in economics at Harvard and theology, and saw that link, and so that doesn't surprise me. But I don't think it's while I don't think we can ever eclipse ourselves from that, it just isn't useful in this kind of a situation, in my opinion, because I think what we are is we're at a point in history where we now have the perspective on ourselves and our culture and other cultures and whatnot, is that we have a different definition now of what it means to be human. And what it means to be human and equal to other humans. And so those definitions that we've inherited take on a new meaning by virtue of the horizon we are currently in. And the horizon is ever expanding notions of what it means to be human. And that's where our understanding of race and culture and sex and all those things come in, that we're broadening our horizon. So I don't see it profitable to try to go back and recast originating documents. They are what they are. It's the consequence of what they are that we are now dealing with. And I think we're in a point of time where we take new definitions and we build new bridges in a way that we haven't done before. So that's where I think this conversation leads me. And I just don't think it's useful to be looking back. It's useful to be looking forward. And I look forward to what's obviously going to happen during the Biden administration, where we are having to construct new ways of recognizing each other, respecting each other, even with political differences. That's where I see us going. So,
Thank you for your perspective on that. What my response to that is this: while you're clearly a very erudite and educated, highly sophisticated man, many people do not have that level of education. So I would, and that level of understanding of what it means to be human. I would challenge you to say, I would challenge the notion that we have a different understanding of what it means to be human when we have policies enacted in this country that cage children at borders because of the color of their skin. And it almost exclusively, you didn't see European children caged at the borders when they were trying to come into this country. You didn't see them detained. You didn't see them separated from their families. They were dehumanized. Oh, to this day, 611 children are separated from their families and their parents cannot be found. So I would say, what does it mean to be human? And that we have a different understanding? No, we don't. Because what we do is we still have 95% of the people who are currently incarcerated are Black and brown. How is that possible? Do they commit all of the crime? I don't think so. What we have is a vast swath of people, of brown and Black people, who are existing in subhuman and substandard housing arrangements with subhuman and substandard healthcare. We still have the problem. We still have the inequality. So we can't say that all people, that we have a different understanding of what it means to be human when we treat huge swaths of the population as subhuman. So I would challenge that. I would also say that the response that you saw at the Capitol, the response that we saw just a couple of Wednesdays ago, on the 6th of January, was a direct response to the power that Black and brown people took when they exercised their voting rights and when they went to the polls and they exercised the rights that had been granted to them by law, which, by the way, only took effect in 1964. So I would suggest to you, and then was rolled back just recently. So I would say, and when you look at the gerrymandering, the voter suppression, the continuing dehumanization economically and politically of Black and brown people, we have not arrived at a more advanced or enlightened viewpoint about our collective humanity. We haven't. It's not demonstrated in our laws or our policies, or clearly in the attitudes of over 70 million people in this country who voted with their, voted by their conscience for people who rejected the humanity of people who were not of European descent. I would just push back on that. So I do think, and I don't think that everybody knows our history. My experience in the groups that we have is that when people when we show the Mark Charles video and we show Henry Louis Gates's Great African Civilizations, what happens is that people are like, wait a minute, I never knew that Africa had highly advanced civilization before the Europeans ever arrived on the continent. They never knew that. And so, and they're feeling that their educational system has failed them. It's completely new information. When we show videos about the illusion of race, the power of the illusion of race and the history of the development of the concept of race, people are shocked to know that race has no biological foundation whatsoever, none. There is no genetic difference, none. It does not exist. So, but people are still walking around under the illusion that there is some genetic difference between you and I. Yes, Roger.
I don't mean to disagree with Don, but I think we do have to go back. And I just like to suggest we need to go back to the source, which is Jesus.
Right.
And I think that Jesus would have been very clear about a lot of these things, not back to the Pope in the 15th century,
right?
Back to the beginning.
Thank you.
Sorry.
You're absolutely right. And see, we as the people who claim to be followers of the risen Christ, of the followers of a brown-skinned Palestinian Jew, this is the one we claim to follow, a brown-skinned Palestinian Jew. He was not, I want to be very clear, based on the geography of where he was born and raised, he was not a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, sweet-smelling savior. I'm sorry to break that to you. We are called to build the beloved community. We're called to build bridges. We're called to dismantle the walls that build up between the people of God. And we're all people of God. God is in all of us. But an outsider looking in at the landscape of Christianity would hardly think that this is our call, given our current fissures and fractures within the body of Christ alone. But indeed, it is our calling. If you try to sit down and have a conversation with an ultra-conservative, white evangelical, parishioner or priest or pastor, you're going to find very different. You're going to find a prosperity gospel. You're not going to find a Jesus that ministered primarily to brown-skinned poor people, and whose gospel clearly shows a preferential option for the poor. What we have adopted in this country is what I call empire Christianity. It's a Christianity that embraces the values of the empire as opposed to being countercultural. We're called to be counter to the culture of the empire.
I'm glad.
Sorry.
No, I'm just looking at the time. So maybe one or two more questions, and then we'll need to.
Sure.
I want to sort of point us forward to our next steps.
Yes, Martha.
Yeah, I really love the idea of the truth and conciliation movement because I think one of the things that blocks people from even discussing stuff is fear.
Yes.
Fear that I will give up my home, fear that somehow, and if you have a situation like, they did in South Africa, where, look, we're just wanting to get this stuff out. And you can't tell me that that we don't feel guilty about what happened. And we would like to, maybe some little piece of us would like to get it out, but we're afraid that we'll be threatened, that our possession will be threatened.
That's right.
But I love the idea that if you could somehow get this conversation out in the open, with some sort of guarantee that you are not threatened, I mean, I think that's wonderful and dynamite, and I'm for it.
Well, you know what I'm going to say to you is this, and I really appreciate you saying that, because that is what I have heard in the groups that we, I've had people directly say, I mean, I'm all for dismantling white supremacy, but I don't want you to take anything that I have. I don't, I get it completely. And I don't want anybody to take anything that I have. I mean, I'll be honest, I get that. But what I would say is this: the government perpetuated this, the church perpetuated this, and the movement for reparations is not for you to ask you to give up your stuff. Okay. The movement for reparations is to ask that the government recognize and find ways to compensate people who have been impacted, most severely impacted by the outrageous disparities that exist in our society. And we must find ways. You don't have to give up anything except for your time, talent, and maybe a little bit of your treasure to try to find ways to dismantle systems that continue to perpetuate the illusion of race and white skin supremacy. So what I would, I think that the notion of a Truth and Conciliation Commission that he called for in this year is really very powerful, because one of the ways that I'm engaging in the truth telling is to be able to come into these conversations and to dispel the fear and to dispel the myths and to educate people so that we all have at least the beginnings of a common understanding of our history, and then think together and work together and pray together about how we can move forward. In his letter from a Birmingham jail, Martin Luther King Jr. said this. He said, moreover, I'm cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow provincial outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. So I'm going to leave you with this. People of God, we must continually pray as the psalmist did in Psalm 51. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and put a new and right spirit within me. Do not cast me away from your presence, and do not take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and sustain me in a willing spirit. St. Luke's, I'm just going to ask you, do you have a willing spirit? Do you have a willing spirit to engage in courageous and sacred conversations to begin to dismantle the inequities that currently exist in our society? We are at a tipping point. And if we don't engage in these conversations together now, if we don't come to love one another and see our common humanity, if we don't risk the vulnerability required and confront the fear, which I believe Howard Thurman says is the hound dog from hell. Fear is a hound dog from hell. If we don't begin to confront that, then we are going to be doomed. I'm telling you, now is the time. I mean, it was a time a long time ago, but now is really the time. Our very future, our lives, our spirits, our salvation depends on it. So with that, I will say, I love you. God bless you. And thank you for being here in this space with me.
Well, Kris, thank you so much. I wonder if we have a minute, we might talk a little bit about next steps.
Yes.
Because I think you're quoting Psalm 51 is really perfect, right? Because that's the Psalm for Ash Wednesday, which is coming up. That's the Psalm of confession. And I think in our tradition, we have the seeds for the work that needs to happen, right? That of telling the truth, of repenting, of turning, of changing.
Yes.
But it takes time, and it takes courage, and it takes community. And I wonder if we could have a little conversation about the space we're trying to create this Lent for these conversations to continue at St. Luke's, because I think this is a lot to throw into 45 minutes
Sure.
on a Zoom call. And I'm really hopeful, and I know Naomi is as well, that we'll be able to get a group that will continue these conversations with you, Kris. And we're so grateful to you for being available to do that with us. Can we
I'm
say just a
so,
word about what that's going to look like so people might
yes,
consider
I will.
joining us?
Absolutely. So we are really looking forward and very hopeful to work with your church to engage in these sacred conversations over a period of time. You don't, as Ryan said, you can't do this in 45 minutes. You can't do it in an hour. So the way that sacred conversations is structured is this. We start with a 2-day intensive retreat, right? Which is 4 hours over the course of 2 days over Zoom. Now, don't be scared. We're not going to ask you to sit still for 4 hours. We provide breaks, there's music, but we ask you to come into the space having done some homework and come ready to share yourselves, to be vulnerable, to talk about why you're there, and to talk about your reaction to the material that you viewed and read before coming into the room. And so we would start on I believe we settled on a Thursday evening from 5 to 9, and then on a Saturday from 10 to 2, this is Eastern time. My training partner is a woman from Colorado, so she would come into the space with us, and we would begin to just build community and unpack the material that we give you. In between the Thursday session and the Saturday session, there will be another assignment given. So you'll get all of that information ahead of time. You'll get the reading materials, you'll get the viewing resources, and you would just come into the space and have whatever you need to make yourself comfortable with your pillows, your water, your coffee, whatever it is that you need, your snacks and so forth. And it's very informal. It's just like you're sitting on your couches now. After that, we would agree on a day and time on a monthly basis. With some groups, we work every other week, which we find builds better community. So either every 2 weeks or every month, we would build by having a 90-minute session in a weekday evening to continue to unpack additional curated resources for reading and viewing so that we can continue to unpack the conversation. And then usually we end our sessions with a request that the people who have been a part of this community create something creative, right? Whether it's a poem, a story, a drawing, to be able to reflect on and express what you've learned in the context of the community. And a way that, and also articulate a way in which you will continue to work on dismantling white supremacist ideology in this country. Whatever it is, whatever your particular passion is. So some people want to work with youth, some people want to work in the criminal justice system, some people want to work around housing justice or whatever it is. Some people just want to continue to do the internal work, and that's fine. We don't make any judgments about it. And we come to the space, like I say, it's safe space, but it's not comfortable, but it is also, and we challenge, we push back, but we never blame or recriminate or point fingers or cast judgment. It's not about that. It's about building community. And we find that we come away with really long lasting relationships. I can't express to you, we worked with hundreds of people around the country, and the relationships and friendships that have been built are really, really, really special. And then we have I can tell more about, we've formed a community where we come together every 2 weeks in a spiritual space just to share and to network and to continue to be in community with all the people that we've worked with around the country. So you get to meet people from around the country as well. So that's what's being offered February 11th and 13th. And then we would settle on a day during the week where we would meet for 90 minutes during the week to unpack additional resources. And then we make ourselves available to people if they have any questions, comments, or concerns. I say questions, comments, or threats, right, as we move forward. And it would be wonderful. You know, we try to work in groups of 20, of no more than 20, because it becomes a little bit challenging to navigate a Zoom space with more than 20 people and really go deep and be vulnerable and open and, and honest with one another. And I can tell you that, with the group that we had in Connecticut, there were people who had tremendous difficulty. They were like, they really struggled through it, but they stuck with it and were able to really get something out of it, and now are coming into our nurturing justice community to share space and to cry or to lament or to rejoice or, to share what they're going through and to receive support. So that's what we're offering, and we really do hope that you will come into the space with us.
Thank you so much. If folks want to learn more or have questions about the logistics or details of it, email me or Naomi. And I really hope each of you will consider continuing this conversation, because it's, as Susan said in her sermon today, right? Our God is calling us to listen for his call, to share his light and his love. And it feels to me like this is a space that God is calling us into as St. Luke's. So thank you, Kris, for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. And I would just offer a prayer for all of you. God, I just ask that you continue to move by your Spirit throughout the St. Luke's community. Continue to do a new thing in and through them. We are called as the children of God, as the followers of the brown-skinned Palestinian Jew named Jesus. We are called to love mercy and to do justice and to walk humbly with God. So God, continue to provide us with your guidance, your power, your protection, and your strength as we go forth from this place, in this space, to do your bidding, to love the poor, to minister to those in need, and to take care of one another, to serve you in righteousness. I lift this prayer for your people, oh God, by your power and in your Son's name. And we say amen.
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 God bless you all. I hope to see you in February. And please just stay connected. And I'll be more than happy to come back anytime. It's been
Thank you,
wonderful.
Kris.
Thank you, Naomi. Blessings. I'm going to send Naomi the link for that video, and she can distribute it to everybody who was on the call, or so make it available.
Mhm.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Take care.
All right.
Thank
See
you.
you. Thank
Thank you again.
you.
Okay, take care.